Okay, well, now it's your turn, Tom.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you this evening. I am an architect with over 40 years of experience. I've master planned all over the world and built buildings all over the world, and especially in San Francisco. I'm very familiar with the affordable housing crisis, and I sit on the AIA Housing Committee, who that body is studying the issues and trying to find a reasonable and equitable solution for our issues. I'm going to make a presentation tonight about 2550 Irving, and that is an SB 35 project in the Sunset, the first of its kind. It is truly a bellwether, and while I am an objective professional looking at this project, it's very hard to be impartial about that, but I can be objective, and I hope to relate to you some of the planning principles, architectural principles that need to be incorporated into housing as the state moves forward with this process of SB 35, because it truly is a knee-jerk reaction to the housing crisis. So if we could share the screen.
Oh, you should be able to.
Okay, there we go. Very good. So I want to make a few opening comments about the alternate compromise proposal for 2550. This is a design that I created in association with Valencia architects in San Francisco who are specialists in housing. And quite interestingly enough, over the past year, I have forged a relationship with Gordon Marr, our supervisor, to gain his trust and have tried to bring him along with the appropriate approach to affordable housing for District 4, because as the last guest pointed out, each locality has its uniqueness, and it needs to be brought to the forefront to really derive an appropriate process, a process for affordable housing for their districts. So as we go through these slides, I would invite one or two clarification comments, but I'd like to hold off on too much discussion until we get to the end of the slides. I have about a little bit over 20 slides to show to you this evening. And so you'll get the entire picture by the time we get through this presentation. But the first slide is actually something, go ahead. Yes, I think you've all seen this diagram, haven't you? This organization, CSFN, has been educated by the planning department on its housing element of 2022. This diagram is quite compelling. The biggest circle that you see here is the concentration on the west side, and the city has developed the pretense that the west side has not done its fair share in addressing affordable housing. Suffice it to say that the Sunset, this district, has been the safety valve for the entire city in terms of affordability, because its houses are demure and they've been affordable up until about a decade ago. On the map, you see 2550 located just south of Golden Gate Park. That's where the project is. It's an SB 35 project, 7 stories tall. It takes advantage of the density bonus of 3 stories, but the ultimate test is to see if the planning department statement that less than 12% of our affordable housing units are in areas identified bring improved life outcomes to low-income households. So we're going to be talking about livability issues as we go through this. Now, this little cartoon that I developed sort of simplifies and characterizes the crisis that we're dealing with here, because there are storm clouds and they are SB 35, 9, and 10. And we've got to address these things in a professional and intelligent and thoughtful way. Right now, we have the mayor's vision that's driving all of this, and that's really the point that I am focusing on at this particular moment in time. And I've also, one of the roles that I've played is to coalesce a number of neighborhood groups to address and educate them on this particular issue. But also, I'm very intrigued that along with this idea of local environments or communities directing how they want this to build out and play out, they should be looking to their supervisors to be a leader here. And that goes back to my idea of forging a relationship with Gordon Marr, our supervisor for D4. So, but simultaneously, we have a climate change issue that architects are dealing with very effectively, silently, but they need to be merged and coordinated and synchronized with how this program will come together. Next slide. So this is an image of a white paper that I wrote a year ago and presented to the AIA Housing Committee. And this is based on my experience as a planner and having worked for about 3 different planning departments in my career, how to coalesce a rational plan to disperse the need for affordable housing through the district. And in 2013, actually 11, I began my advocacy architecture practice after I thought I was going to retire, but I didn't. And because the city intervened with their policies. So I was appointed to the leadership council of the former district supervisor here, Katie Tang, and I helped her write some of her land use policies and got up to speed on what really needs to happen in the sunset. And my plan is based on finding the most cost-effective sites to build affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, I really mean it. I mean, there's a formula for that. It's land acquisition costs plus construction costs plus delivery regulatory costs equals project costs. That's what architects live and die by. And that's the real formula that we need to be looking at to understand how to deliver truly affordable housing for the needs that we have today. So, but in addition to that, I've researched across the country for programs that really are very thoughtful. And the best program that I came across is in Cambridge. And they have a very, very well thought out program. It took them 3 years to work with the communities, the various neighborhoods, to get consensus on a plan for increasing density with dignity within Cambridge. And my hat's off to these people. And also I've been in touch with an architect in Boston who has allowed me to put together a presentation on one of their premier projects that exemplifies the intelligence and the merits of their affordability program. So then I will say that this was also a part of my educational program for Gordon Marr. I told him about this program and he had heard about it. And I started to talk to him about the difference between SB 35 and Cambridge's program and how this is more like the program that we should have in San Francisco. And it also would address a lot of the division that we have and the name calling that we have over this affordability issue, that we really need to be talking about unifying our population, not dividing it. And this would be a program that could do it. So next slide. So given that premise of looking at Cambridge as a prototype for doing affordable housing, it's not perfect, but it's 10 times better than SB 35. The project that you see, I'm comparing 3 projects here, and I'm starting on the left-hand side. These are all apples to apples comparison, because when we're talking about how the public conversation goes, they don't understand the difference between senior citizen affordable housing, occupational or teacher affordable housing, and so on, because they're very, very different building types. And so on the left, we have the Frost Terrace project that's done in Cambridge. It has a density of 79 dwelling units per acre. That's a metric that architects use to try to understand where the right balance is. And it's 3 to 5 stories. And to compare it to the same type of supportive family housing in San Francisco, you would probably want to go to 88 Broadway. Now, this is in an area where the buildings are 5 to 6 stories tall to begin with. They chose to do 6 stories in that particular example for a net of 144 dwelling units per acre, 6 stories. And by the way, it's done by the developer for the Valencia Gardens, which is John Stewart Company. They did the first prototype for supportive family housing in the Mission in 2002, and that really should be used as a prototype for this type of housing throughout the city, in my view. Now, when you compare it to 2550 Irving, here we are in the Sunset with 2-story, 3-story, 4-story buildings, and there are only 3 buildings within the entire Sunset that are over 6 stories. And so TNDC, the developer for this project, has proposed taking advantage of every density story bonus that they could do to achieve 7 stories that dwarf the 2-story buildings to the north. So let's go to the next story, or the next slide. So this is an interesting matrix that I put together, and actually Gordon Marr presented this to the mayor's staff yesterday to propose a contrast, a compromise in what they're proposing. And I'm doing this based on my work with a cost consultant for affordable housing that knows the funding regulations. And the point of view, the difference of opinion here is that the developer believes that 99 units is what they need for it to pencil out. And our cost consultant is saying, look, you can make it pencil out for 80 units. So I set forth to redesign their building for 80 units. And what you see in the white column is what the developer breakdown is of units on a floor by floor basis. And what you see in the tan area or the beige area is how I reconfigured it to reduce it from a 7-story building to a 6-story building with a setback on the roof level that actually makes the building look like a 5-story building with a penthouse. So that's the difference, and that's the basis for the design of the compromise solution that put forth. Now, this is an image that tells you the reality. This is what the developer wants to do.
Jesus.
Completely unprecedented. And the argument that they created was that the adjacent building at 1326 Avenue was the precedent that allowed them to develop this project. Well, it's only a quarter to a third the footprint of this building, and it's 1 story less. It's only 6 stories. So, and the other interesting thing about this is that you can see that this looks like an MGM hotel that's being built out in the Sunset. Above the building, you can see that yellowed area. That's the commercial area of the Irving Street corridor there. And this is a very busy area. It's actually, I would say it's not a healthy area right now because there are 20 vacant storefronts as it stands right now. And that should be informing the city that they need to be doing the right thing as they begin designing a building of this sort. The building itself is on the north side of the street. So consequently, 7 stories tall. It casts a long shadow into the neighborhood to the north and deprives the present owners of solar panels of solar energy for their use. So it's a very contested issue. But this is not my drawing. This is the architect for the project's drawing, and it tells the story. So I'm going to take you down to the ground floor area now and walk you around the building. So to orient you, the north is to the top of the sheet. You have on the right-hand side 26th Ave. You have on the left-hand side 27th Ave. The block is 240 feet long. Now, this is the ground floor area that the project architect has designed. And my little red arrows that I show along the street frontage are points that I want to make where street architects realize that the street frontage is probably the most important real estate in a project, because that's where you create a vibrancy for urban life, and also you have the possibilities of making connections with the neighborhood and link it and integrate it into that neighborhood. So on the right-hand side, you can see the parking area that the project has. It's only 12 spaces, and it's off. They have to make a curb cut off of 26 to make that happen. 2 of the sides of the parking lot face the street frontage, which is not the greatest thing to do. Along Irving Street, they have several storage features, functions, and that's not the best use of street frontage because you want to make it people-oriented to what's going on inside. And then on the 27th Ave, you have utilities and trash rooms that are located on the street level, which is really incompatible with the neighborhood to the west. So what I've done is to try to reorganize this relationship and suggest that in order to link this project to the neighborhood and make them, as our last guest was talking about, make the families that are going to move in here feel a part of the neighborhood, that perhaps it should be very similar to the neighborhood itself. Now, on another level, what the Office of Housing, the Office of Washington Office Institute states that overconcentration is the key ingredient to be wary of as a practitioner of housing. So circulation and services at the ground level are very, very important to understand. And what I've done here is I've broken down the 3 key critical locations of the project. Location A is the main entrance, and this is where almost 100 families will descend to enter and exit the building. And when architects that have a knowledge of programming of these types of projects design these projects, they actually think of what is it like in the day of a life of a family. So you get up in the morning with your kids, you get them off to school, you take them to the doctor, you take them to buy their shoes, you take them to soccer practice, you have your grandparents come over, you have pizza deliveries and so on and so forth. But the problem is that what descends upon location A are off-site move-in location, and the congregation of families to come and go, the deliveries from Amazon and the like. And then, of course, talking about location B, where the refuse is removed for almost 100 people, that's a critical location to be concerned about as an architect. So you really want to design that correctly to integrate into the local fabric. And then the last location is location C. That's the intersection of 26 and Irving. And we already have gridlock, daily gridlock there that is caused by the Sunset Super. This is a photograph. I mean, this is the reality. But the other reality is that SB 35 does not require the developer to address anything outside the property line of the building. And here you can see the queuing that goes on to enter the parking lot for the Sunset Supermarket. And on Saturdays, you can have honking, you can have shouting, you can have fights breaking out in this parking lot. It's really gridlock that telegraphs itself up to 19th Avenue, and it's like a parking lot. You really avoid this area if you have a car. So I was thinking, how do we create a very simple street level welcoming feel for the new families that would be invited? Because the issue is that the communities, the surrounding immediate neighbors want to have this affordable housing, and it's a misnomer that they don't want affordable housing in this location. It's all a matter of scale and over concentration that we have to be very thoughtful of. And this is a project called the Parkview Commons on Carl Street, very close to Kezar Stadium, where they did a successful job of animating the streets and knitting it into the community, a very successful project. And I thought that this idea could be brought into the project. So we'll go back to, my solution for, yeah.
There we go. Right.
Okay, and also what's essential for these projects is community outreach. This is the project architect's successful project in Palo Alto, and they were allowed as architects to set the pace for working with the surrounding neighbors. And they had a very satisfying relationship with those neighbors, and they came up with this particular solution. But this is the antithesis of how the community is being treated in the Sunset near the site, because the process has not been transparent, and the neighbors have been asked to choose between ground cover and ivy, these meaningless decisions or aspects, and they have not. And actually, Gordon Marr pointed this out to the mayor's office yesterday, that they've really never been allowed to talk about the scale of this project. They've just been shut down. So this is what my solution was for the ground level. You can see some fundamental changes. I relocated the parking to the center of the site. What this achieves is that it makes use of an expanded parking quantity of 16, but it also gets some of the vans off the street to unload right adjacent to the elevator bank there. But I've kept the elevators in the same location that the architects had proposed. But more importantly, I've animated the street by, in the gold color, the residential units that will knit itself into the community and feel more residential. And I've taken advantage of a new ordinance in the DPW for utilizing the right-of-way area for landscaping that will animate this space and make it feel more residential and more inviting. The numbers that you see in the gold spaces are representative of whether they are a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom or a studio. have a child care facility with a play area just in the back there. The pink area is the administration that handles the people coming into the lobby. And the orange area are the social service workers that will address all the needs of the 25% population that will be in this building that are recovering homeless families. So in order to address the previous concern that I mentioned about utilizing the street frontage for the right use, I've taken all of the storage functions and the like, and I've put them in a shallow basement below that, because the reality is that the slope falls about 3 feet from east to west. And so you have an opportunity to build a shallow basement on the west side of the site where I can put all the storage where it belongs, in the trash room that actually is out of sight. And I have a little dumbwaiter that comes up into the street so we don't have unsightly trash issues in the developer's solution. And this all relates to how utilities are most effectively brought into basement areas and distributed throughout the building of this particular size. So this is a plan that the developer wants to build. And this is something that I can't change. I wish I could, but I can't. And what you see is a whole hotel-like organized plan. This is what architects call a double-loaded corridor. The families access their units off of this double-loaded corridor, but there's very little natural light that gets in here. And the distance along this corridor is almost a football field length. It's 200 feet because the site from one end to the other is 240 feet. So the architect has done their best to satisfy the developer's program, to fill her up, is get as many units in this site as they can. And this is what happens when you are designing only towards density bonus counts and not thinking about the livability of these families. Next slide. So in order to meet the state funding guidelines for percentages of units, you have to have 25% of the total be 3-bedroom, and you have to have 25% of the total be 2-bedroom units, but the rest of the units can be any mix. And so I was able to conceive a simple reorganization to meet that criteria on floors 2 and 3. A simple change of converting 2 1s into a 2 and a studio, that because 2s are more valuable. And then at the core area where people come up in the elevators, you can see right here in that center there, where the arrows are, I would simply flip the electrical over to the right-hand side of the elevators and have people access the elevators from the opposite side, the west side, and then slide the stair to the west to make a simple revision, maintaining the architect's original plan here to make it work for the 2nd and 3rd floor. Now let's go up to the 4th and 5th floor. On the 4th and 5th floor, you see no changes in the units. And I would simply have the same identical core of the elevators and the electrical room, the stairs reorganized to simply facilitate the ground level design that I have recommended. But I think that the major improvement is on the roof. And what I've tried to do here is, as I said before, create from a 7-story proposal down to a 5-story building with a penthouse. So the gold is what you see. The gold area is the penthouse with about 9 units up there. But what it does, what it achieves, is that it allows a green roof to occur there. And you can see the green is where the grass will be, and the blue is where perhaps some pools will be. The orange will be the area where they can have a community room. The kids can come up to the playground area on the west side and have direct sun. This is incredibly important for these young families to have direct sun and on site. But the problem is that because of the constraints of the site proportions, that on the north side of the building, in that white area where my cursor is there, it's right there. Oops, sorry. You seen that? So right there in the north area, that will be in shadow 12 months out of the year. And that is not a place to have outdoor functions, especially for kids. Anyone that knows the Sunset climate is that the summer months are cold and drizzly, and that's not the place you want to be, and that's not the place you want to have families feel like they have a home to go to. So this is what the design is about. And it's really about livability issues. And for the first time, I've met with Eric Shaw, the director of housing, 3 times now. And for the first time, we've started to talk about livability issues. And that's basically been the argument that the community has here that has not been heard, that has been snuffed. So next slide. Here is a massing diagram that my associate architect, Mike Garavaglia, created for me. On the left-hand side, this is the TNDC massing model. And the reason why I chose Mike is that he also does historical work. He shot this shot with a 50mm lens that replicates what the eye sees. And that's a 7-story building. And the mass of it that would be imposed on this context, and is totally unacceptable. Now you can see in my design, I've made the building look like a 5-story building with a penthouse that relieves it, and with my design along the street frontage, it will make it friendly to families to walk along, and also the neighbors to feel like it's somewhat a part of their neighborhood, although it's not perfect by any shake of the imagination here. So here we have the reality of trying to argue with the mayor's vision, as I pointed out before, that this is a compromise that is that's more than halfway between the original zoning limit height of 4 stories to basically 5.5 versus the 7 stories that is, it's the approach that is, it's just a unit count basis that the mayor's vision, or the mayor's office of housing's vision, is to get as many units in there as possible, is a necessity. It isn't a necessity. It's a function of their inability to have a reasonable and comprehensive process. So again, hearkening back to the prototype for supportive family housing, the successful example is the Valencia Gardens that was designed from the disastrous project that was built there for vets to come home from World War II. William Worcester, a very famous San Francisco architect, designed that along with landscape architect Thomas Church, and the government got involved, and all went south. But in 2002, some very innovative architects got together with the John Stewart Company to evolve this 3 to 4 story project in the middle of the Mission District that features walk-up private entries, private backyards, all providing a sense of home for low-income families, and no hotel-like corridors, which naturally builds community. And this is a model that the city should be following because it's density with dignity for families. It has a density of only 52 dwelling units per acre, whereas the city now is proposing 225 dwelling units per acre at 2550. So it comes full circle back to this idea that I've tried to convince people of understanding that the city and the planning department in particular has missed a very important step in addressing our affordable housing crisis. It's not a housing crisis for sure. It's an affordable housing crisis. Architects know how to bring the price down, but we have to have a reasonable and intelligent and thoughtful process because the politicians are not the experts here. They need our help, and they need a master plan to site these locations in a way that takes advantage of low-cost land, vacancies, rehabilitation of existing buildings, and infill of vacant properties. And this is possible. And I've driven around the entire Sunset with our supervisor, Gordon Marr, and I think that he's got the sense of this and understands that the politicians are leading us astray on these points. And we're trying to make a case for 2550 to be a bellwether so that the west side of this city can actually thrive and integrate this kind of housing into our communities so that we put aside this criteria of density as only one facet. It's only looking through a singular lens for doing housing. So time is of the essence, and 2550 will not be ready for until 2025. Think about that. That's because it is going to have to be detailed in such a complicated way in concrete and steel. There will be 99 units that the developer wants and says will only pencil out. And each one of these units costs $1 million each. So we need to have faster and multiple methods, but I think that architects know how to do this if they're only allowed to be at the table. And that's what I've tried to do. So I'll take any questions that you have, and love to hear your feedback.
I have one question right off the bat, and that is the design that you have considered and you're suggesting, would that be a different kind of structural project? So it wouldn't end up costing $1 million for each unit because it's slightly shorter, or would it still require the same amount of concrete and steel almost?
Very excellent question. I just had a conversation with the Wood Institute yesterday. There is a new building type allowed in the city, but it's also being made into a hybrid. I won't get too complicated about code designations, but you're allowed to integrate cross-laminated timber into systems. And if you can keep under 65 feet height to the parapet, not including the penthouse, you can make that work. And that's what my design does. It actually keeps under 65 feet. Right now, it's 75 feet for seven stories to the roof line. It's just under the definition of a high rise. And what the developer is risking at this point in time is that if they put an occupancy on the roof, which they are considering of greater than 50 people, they may trigger high-rise requirements. I've done high rises in the city, so I know this. But yes, that's what we have to be doing. We have to be thinking about these buildings economically. I will add, there's a construction company in the company that I've worked with quite a bit. Their name is Swinnerton. They have a subsidiary called Timberlab. I know people there that I want to work with. I just need to get the approval from the mayor's office to allow us to do our job.
So then I assume you don't yet have the price differential figured out yet.
No, it's a very.
Okay. That would be too much to ask. Thank you. Any other questions about this project? Linda?
Well, this is just very interesting. And I'm going to say I grew up about 8 blocks or so from here, 18th near Judah, so I know the neighborhood. And now I live in Nob Hill, where we're much higher density and so on. And, this just resonates in every way, what you're proposing. For one thing, when we did our rezoning, from very high heights, we chose 65 feet. Why? Because we had conferred with Passmore and his staff, and that was the point at which you would be changing it to expensive construction. The other thing I've heard is like low income housing development. Often they're choosing like 5 stories or thereabouts in order to stay in the wood frame type construction, including TNDC. The other thing I'm going to mention is we had support from CSFN for all these things at the time, including for the TNDC project that we invited for Nob Hill. There was a large church site, a corner site, and they were invited to build there with David Baker and so on, and the mayor's office of housing was for it and everything. But unfortunately, the planning director screwed the whole thing up, and the supervisors. You wouldn't believe that they could have screwed it up like that. They were interested in building 5 stories. They could put in 52 units of, senior housing and give us all kinds of amenities, open space and this and that. They were wonderful to work with. So I'm kind of surprised that the project, is being proposed this way, but who knows, who it was that was involved in making it into something unworkable. I agree with you on the massing and so on. And in our neighborhood, the buildings have been built that are 65 feet, like along Polk Street, especially, and that area. And they have the top story set back, and you can't tell that it's more than 5 stories. It looks very compatible with the neighborhood.
Exactly, and I would augment your comment by saying that SB 35 is a new law. It was just devised and conceived and became a law in 2018, and we don't know how to react to it, but certainly the bureaucrats are really steamrolling this process out there, and in particular in the Sunset, because as they allege, we have not done our fair share out here providing for affordable housing, which is just not true. And I want to also point to another project that one of the first SB 35 projects in the Sunset was the Shirley Chisholm Teachers Affordable Housing, which is in the outer Sunset. That particular project in its early days had a more rational housing director in the mayor's office, and I know that the architects that did that, because I recommended that they be a part of our housing symposium of the AIA this past June, and their density for that site is 98 dwelling units per acre compared to the density at 2550, which is at 225 dwelling units per acre. It's just over the top. I could go on about the statistics that are irrational at 2550, but suffice it to say that this urgency to meet RENA goals is pushing the mayor's office to find the easy way out rather than the thoughtful way out to address our issues. And it's not going to solve the issues to build at this density.
Okay, George.
Hi. Thank you, Tom. That was very interesting. And I really enjoyed our talk the other day. First off, our first point of agreement, the RENA goals are ridiculous, and they are forcing San Francisco to be ridiculous in response. However, you wouldn't think they'd be this ridiculous. And I very much like what you're proposing as to what is being proposed by the city of San Francisco. And as we talked about, well, we didn't talk about this, but I did talk to this with Sean Ellsberg, and the Prop A housing bonds only allowed $153 million, I think. And what happened there, this is going to go through all that bond money so quickly that you have to look at this, turn this around, start thinking about all the projects that could have been built that won't be built because this is built. So this is a horrible project to add for 70 or 80 more people. And you have, unfortunately, the planning did not go and do their due diligence. So you have soil contamination. It's going to be a huge cost and expense, take a huge amount of time, and that's going to add tremendously to the costs, which the city MOHCD will probably have to pick up. The height is ridiculous, and Tom was dead on about that. And I love how his setbacks, and I guess you called them penthouses. I'm not sure what to call it, but it's a great look from the street. So that's to your credit. And I think what simple things are being overlooked. The cost of construction is up 13% this year, right now, from January. And imagine what it's going to be in 2 years. So the $94 million budget that they have planned is completely inadequate. They're asking already. Eileen showed me today, Eileen Boken, that they're already asking for $120 million, and that won't be near enough to build this. And I don't want to take too much time, but I do think that Tom's way is a much, much better way. And we have to start looking at smaller type affordable housing with density. And Eugene Liu is recommending some great things. I'm sure Tom is recommending could design some great things as well. And the last thing I'll say is Myrna Melgar told me that they have a special fund now of $10 million they have in the budget to find sites to build on, because I'm trying to find some sites where we can build some of your guys' proposals, so we can show people how good affordable housing can be in San Francisco if MOHCD would just let it be. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Jean?
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for this presentation. I agree with everything other people have said. I think the scale is, I agree with, I don't even want to repeat it because George and everyone else expressed it so effectively as well as you did. So I'm going to take I have a little different tack, which is the following. Assuming we think your project is a better alternative and we don't want this 2550 behemoth to go up in Irving, how can we help you change their mind and get them to agree to build it your way rather than their way? What are the best things that we can do to help move this in the right direction?
Well, a couple of things that I would say. The answer is not negotiating with TNDC. They have their goals and they work for MOCAD. This interesting, the architects understand this contractual relationship. Architects are usually at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to these sorts of decisions. So the mayor's office is the pressure point that we need to apply. I wanted to add that Gordon Marr, through my conversations with him, had the intelligence to put into the resolution that was passed on July 26th for allocating the first funding to acquire the land, that developer and MOCAD shall have a transparent process with the community, meaning that the fact that the scale of the building was off limits for discussion up until now shall now be on the table, and livability issues shall be considered. But the other thing that the amendment said is that there will be an equitable, I quote, equitable balance of the community's legitimate concerns about its scale and bulk, such that that will be a conversation that will need to be had. But yesterday was the first step, I felt, in addressing this this mantra that MOCAD has, that build it to the max, build it to the max.
How do you get there? I mean, is there anything we can do to help move, get those meetings held and have those conversations that resolution says should be done? I mean, I'm just, little Gene Q citizen. I don't know how to get those people at the table.
Right. We've initiated that process by unifying some of the groups. I mean, after all, the Coalition of San Francisco Neighborhoods is the concept behind that is that it's a coalition of neighborhoods to put our viewpoint forward. And I see as necessary, in the West of Twin Peaks Central Council agrees with me on this, is that the West Side needs to align like it never has before, because the city has focused on the West Side to meet their unit count goals. And
so should we start signing petitions, sending emails, making phone calls?
Absolutely, but we should also be talking with West of Twin Peaks Council, because they have a very strong land use committee. I actually presented a similar presentation to them, and Supervisor Melgar was there, and I'm sure that it raised her eyebrows to see that a rational alternative was offered. And Connie Chen needs to be brought into this fold. We need to have, according to Mark Spadina, who's the chair of the land use committee for West of Twin Peaks, recommended to me that we have an alliance of 3 to 4 supervisors on the West Side that come together and say, look, we need to have a chair at the table here, because this process that SB 35 outlines denies local involvement. It's just a bogus involvement. So that's the way I think that we need to proceed.
I'm still trying to get more particular, Tom. How do those of us in this room do anything, if we can do anything, to facilitate that action?
Well, first of all, as we've talked about, Gene, your organization needs to, my recommendation is your organization writes a letter to MOCAD. So organizations always have a more strong appeal to the city because there is a political price that the mayor and all supervisors will pay if they recklessly approach the west side with the SB 35 and SB 9 approach and SB 10. We need to have a more rational approach, and we need to be allowing experts. So that's my recommendation. We need to have a West Side coalition, and I would invite you to all connect with the West of Twin Peaks and your organization, Jean, and Speaks organization has been doing some wonderful things. I've asked D Forward to join this this effect because they actually believe that this is overreach on the government's part, but no one's standing up. And we've been in the shadow of the propaganda that has been that has trivialized the issues here, that truly trivializing the issues between NIMBYism and YIMBYism. This is not who we are. This is not who we are. And so it's going to take an earth swell, a groundswell of people objecting to this policy.
I do have one other thing I'm just going to say. I will get in touch with you later, Tom, on this, if that's okay, because I'd like to write a letter in behalf of CSFN. I'd like to really go into the details of the hybrid construction, the cost differential, and why the density is an important issue for us to not really be resting everything on. So I'll talk to you later about that so we can get the details correct.
Tom, you have your organization has a website that has a petition attached to it.
Yes.
Can you put that link in the chat so that everyone in this room can? I don't remember the name of the website, but there's a
Yes,
petition there that I didn't know even existed until yesterday.
Okay. So just let me clarify. I am an independent architect helping three neighborhood associations: the Mid Sunset Association, the Sunset Community Alliance, that's the Chinese American Neighborhood Association, and the Sunset Sunset Residents Association, which is in my neighborhood, that my wife is the president of. And also the other help that we can get is that we've contacted all of the merchants in Irving Street, and out of about 120 merchants, 105 merchants oppose as it's proposed this project. I mean, that's significant.
But isn't there a website? I thought I saw it yesterday.
Yes,
I'll get it in.
yeah, Kat, my partner here is putting into the chat site, so you can
Okay.
help.
Thank you.
I will also send out notes to everybody who's here, who I know who they are. The two people who I'm not sure who they are could write their emails in if they want copies of the notes. And I know Linda has her hand raised.
There's something I can do, and that is, Senior Disability Action, which I'm active on, and with their housing efforts and so on. They and others, of course, are going to be called on, have been called on to come out and, oppose the NIMBYs, I guess it would be, right? And
NIMBYs.
so, that isn't necessary, and I'll try to, talk with them and influence it. We just had something like that in Japantown about that hotel, and I and a few other people were able to influence both them and the SIP Hotel Coalition to realize there's a better way to succeed. All right, so that I can do. I'm just going to suggest one thing, and this is not a reprimand. I wouldn't refer to recovering homeless families. In my neighborhood, lots of people were evicted. We weren't considered recovering homeless people, and it gives a little wrong tenor, not only to the people I work with, but to those people in the Sunset.
Certainly.
What should they be called, Linda?
Unhoused.
What would you use? Unhoused is all right, but what
That's what
What
they're
would
saying
you
in the
call
mission.
people who've been evicted and are, looking for home? Do they need a title? But whatever, I
I
wouldn't.
agree
call it
with what you
recovery
said,
home.
but if you wanted to sort of
Recovering
keep,
homeless is the kind of thing that the HSH, the huge bureaucracy, they treat everybody as if they're sick, there's something wrong with them, we'll manage them. And I wouldn't subscribe to that. We're trying to reform them, the administration.
And one other comment I'm going to make, and that is, it's not just the Western neighborhoods that are doing this. We've been doing this on the east side of the city for the entire, for a decade or more. And I believe it's really important for all the different neighborhoods and all the different districts to know what's going on, because the issues you're dealing with are also going to be dealt with in District 11 and 10 and, 9 and most of them. So, and Al's district, there's the same kind of thing, essentially, are we going to do this density for the sake of density? Or are we going to do, like you said, a livable kind of situation for everyone, and particularly the businesses? I don't know how it is in your district, Al, but in the Mission, they're just devastated by all of this. And for the city, I'm sorry, but for city authorities to talk and whine about how bad the businesses are having it and how we're going to give them money and do all this stuff, when they don't just give them what they actually need, which is get off their backs, and quit making these changes that are making life so difficult. Right now, I got to say the number one problem in our neighborhood is they're closing all the drugstores. They're closing, the crime, and people are getting attacked in the daytime. So I believe that, if you don't have a big dog or something, people are really, that's what's going on. So this unlivable conditions are in every neighborhood. And I believe that we do need to all, get together on this point. The livability is what we're missing here.
Exactly. I just wanted to add that one of the fundamental problems here is in our society, and I've been in this profession since 1974, that the complexity, the mere complexity has risen exponentially, especially with the inclusion of digital and computer technology. We're all so specialized in what we do. One of the things that I have to applaud architects for is that by the nature of their profession, they bring experts together to solve very complicated problems, and they're a natural antidote to the complication and the sophistication of these issues. It would be a euphemism to say that politicians are generalists, because they are not knowledgeable about these issues. For example, for architects, housing has to be understood from three perspectives. It's not just the planning code, it's the housing code, but it's also the building code. It's very, very complicated, and the politicians need to rely on this kind of expertise to see their way through this crisis, because it's not just this affordability crisis. We have an impending climate crisis that we're dealing with here, and to shut light out to the residents to the north of this site and deprive them of utilizing solar energy is outrageous. It's really outrageous. It's a state law, and I don't know what the resolution is. It's just uncharted territory. So the politicians have hurled us into this chaos.
Well, one of the things about single family homes, I'm going to say this, and homes that have exposure on more than one wall, exterior exposure on more than one wall, you do have the opportunity to use natural light as opposed to electric light. And you have the ability to somehow mitigate some of the issues with heat and temperature change as well. If you're in a place that has more than one, wall exposure. So in a lot of ways, single family homes and homes that are built, more with more different sides of the walls facing outward, you have more options to deal with that stuff, as opposed to just turning on your thermostat and down. And, I don't know how you actually have to have a fan to circulate the air in the high rises, and the windows don't open. There's something wrong with that kind of situation. If you want to live in that kind of a fishbowl environment, you really are dependent totally on, power coming from PG&E or something, which isn't a good idea right now. Okay, Jean.
Tom, I was just thinking, when, you're really talking about a paradigm shift away from this increased density and more towards, scaling back things and incorporating, architectural principles and sort of moving things in a different direction, the direction in which we're going in San Francisco and probably other big cities as well. That said, is there some way of getting a consortium or a group of people in your business, architects, planners, people in urban planning programs, academics, to also sign on to something that would support this particular project, your particular vision of this particular project?
I'm working on it. And I have colleagues who agree with me on my housing committee. About half of the committee agrees with me, and the other half are a little bit afraid to express their opinion. Here, this is the rub. There's a built-in conflict of interest because architects make their living by building buildings. So they'll take their contracts and pay their employees. So it's difficult. I mean, the difference in the way that I practice architecture is that I have a planning background too, and I understand the necessity to integrate those two disciplines. And so I've been working on convincing. I actually think that Gordon Marr understands what my vision is. And I think that we'll try to pull off a compromise at 2550 and then continue working on this idea that I have for an affordable housing process, not product, a process for the Sunset District. And it may become a paradigm for adjacent areas.
Okay, I guess Tomasita has her hand up, and then Linda, and then Glenn. Tomasita? You're on mute.
Did put my comment in the chat that there should be a code requirement that any new tall buildings be only built on segments of the street where they will not cast shadows that ruin life for existing.
Thank you.
Would have a complete effect on the other side of the street. But the building that they point to on the corner is on the south side of Irving Street. It doesn't cast shadow on anybody.
Precisely, Tomasito. And this is the thing. Hey. I will say that the zoning plans that we have on the books now don't recognize the climate era that we've entered, and climate change isn't an idea. It's here. We know that as Californians because of the wildfires. The East Coast people know that because of sea rise and the ferocity, the ferociousness of the storms that they endure. So I can envision that height limits need to be step from the south side down to when you think about a block, the north edge of a block could be the tallest and cast its shadow into the street. And then on the south side, it's less tall. So it allows the sunlight to come into all the properties that are in between the northern street and the southern street. So yes, we had to rewrite these zoning ordinances.
Well, next month, we're going to go back to dealing with solar issues because we have net metering and we also have the issues with the shadow. So anybody who's concerned about solar, that's going to be our subject next month. Thank you. Linda?
Okay, well, exactly the points that are being made tonight are the things that for our appeal on Tuesday about the Grubstake project, 1525 Pine, we need to have expressed. You know, I am sorry that Nob Hill has not been able to reorganize to get back in CSFN because we had a meeting April last year set and the COVID came, and then we had September this year planned, the COVID came. So we can't get our community people together even, all right? So the project that's coming up with the state density bonus, you know, jiggering in everything that they can, you know, there will be no natural light. There will be from the eighth floor, ninth floor, and next door is a 13-story building. Electric lights going down into the light well will be the only light that they will get. Right? That was proposed by Lower Polk neighbors, accepted by the planning department and so forth. They said, well, will they be full spectrum light? Oh, well, okay, then we'll vote for it. That's one thing. No air, you know, I mean, in a light well, you would not have this in New York City. They only go 5 stories in a walk up, right? This is a 13-story building and a 9-story building. So that's one thing, you know, and it doesn't have to be done that way. There are 2 or 3 other things that resonated that came up that are exactly the same issues. You know, maybe we can get to that later.
That's why I wanted
need
to
this
have a
help.
meeting, yeah. That's why I wanted to invite people from all the neighborhoods to listen to this, because what we've discovered, I'm going to write up notes and send to everybody here. I'm not going to get into it, but I discussed with people on the DeHaro project earlier today. A lot of the same issues are coming up and they have to do with definitions. And they're very specific code issues, which we're looking into. So everybody who's on the
Let me
meeting will get the notes once I get them together.
Building code was mentioned, and that's absolutely true. That's what I raised at the planning commission, and they're all confused. You know, the planners said they were afraid to do anything because they might get sued. All right, David Chu, you've seen the video. I sent it to some of the
Yes.
CSFN people. Confirmed. You know what I've been telling them. You cannot say that the state density bonus overcomes, you know, unit exposure and setbacks and open space to the extent that it violates the building code. He said, absolutely can't. He thought I was crazy. He thought I was having a fantasy when I described what was approved for that building.
Well, what excites me about it particularly and annoys me is the fact that you don't have any exits onto Pine Street. That by the idea of the back street door, the back door for residents only, you know, that really upsets me. But I'm gonna call in Glenn now. He hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you so much for calling on me. I wanted to first say hello to Eugene Liu, and I spoke with Supervisor Melgar this Sunday at Ray Doyle's celebration of life, and she mentioned that there was $10 million that was going to be spent on experimental development projects, quite possibly like his. That being said, a 6-story structure in my neighborhood would be completely inappropriate. The only place that something like that would be appropriate would be maybe on a Geary Street or Terraville Street, where they have existing 6-story structures. That being said, I think you're approaching this project too broadly. You need to specify it being appropriate where buildings are adjacent of the same height. And thank you for allowing me to make this comment. Have a good evening. I have another meeting I need to go to.
I just want to add that one augment to that gentleman's comment. You know, I spoke about the program in Cambridge. One of the precepts of their program is that architects have to, by code, show a development pattern to justify their stories. That isn't required by SB 35. And you see, that just goes to show that they have thought it through in Cambridge. It's not a perfect system, but it's leagues and fathoms beyond SB 35. We are just not being intelligent about this. The other thing too, that some of you may be aware of by, and I learned this, got wind of this through United Neighbors, and they put me in touch with Professor Condon, Patrick Condon in British Columbia. He did an extensive study on Vancouver because they tried the same thing about a decade ago. They said that, gee, prices are too high in this city. We have to densify. And they did that. It didn't bring down the prices. And the reason is because of the economics of capitalism, but more particularly land prices. So that's the key, land prices. We can also work on construction prices, but we also need to look at public land for increasing housing availability. And we also need to do it on a building type basis, because family housing, supportive housing, is the most intensive of all of the affordable building types, and that should inform where and how we design our housing to support families.
Okay, well, does anybody else have anything they want to say? Looks like we've gotten, I will just mention, like I said, everybody leaves me their email. I will put together a report that has a little more information than what we have here tonight, because it's too dense. I don't want to get into it. And I want to continue talking to Tom about some of this stuff as well, so we can add more information. I'm really hoping that people in all the different districts and all the different supervisorial districts at least will really work on supporting what we're doing here. And let's also consider, like I said, let's consider the energy that's going into these, and the energy that's going to be required to run them, as opposed to a more natural environment and a home with a more natural, means of relating to air and temperature control and all that. So those are issues that nobody's talked about that at all lately. Here we are, we got to save the planet. We got to use less energy, but everything they do is totally more energy, sucking more energy. So anyway, did anybody else have anything else they wanted to talk about?
Well, I would just like to add that if any of you are representatives of an organization, please get in touch with me through Mari, and I would really encourage you to write a letter to the mayor's office. 3 individuals in particular, that would be Sean Ellsburn, Andrea Bruce, the mayor, and Eric Shaw. Because that's the decision-making nexus that needs to understand that their approach in adopting SB 35 and SB 9 has to be mitigated by local input.
Okay, that sounds like a good way to end it. We'll be, like I said, sending out a lot more information, particularly about SB 9 in the coming days, to anybody we've got their email. Thank you.
Thank you.